فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Islamic Mary podcast. So for today, I want to continue with the chapter of Mary or Surat Maryam and speak about verse 27. So as we discussed in previous episodes, that Maryam has given birth to her child, Jesus, Isa, and she's told that she has to take a vow of silence. And she's even returned back to her people, and her people are upset. They're angry. She's coming from a priestly class. She has a good reputation within her community, and they are condemning her for having a child out of wedlock. And in this climactic scene, her people, her qawm, start condemning her, and they start making slanderous claims. And verse 27 continues the story, and they say, Ya ukhta Harun, ma kana abuki imra saw, wa ma kana ummuki baghiya. She went back to her people carrying the child, and then they say, Mary, you've done something terrible. And then it continues and says, sister of Aaron, your father was not a bad man, your mother was not unchaste. So we see in this verse 28, which is a continuation of verse 27, that they say, Ya ukhta Harun. They say, oh, sister of Aaron. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this particular phrase. And in this phrase, there is a Christian polemic that says that Muhammad, when he was writing the Quran, that he got confused between the sister of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses, because in the Bible, the sister of Aaron is Maryam. So the author of the Quran understood that Mary, or Maryam, who was the mother of Jesus, was the same person as the sister of Aaron. So this is one opinion that you see in the literature, but the dominant scholarly narrative, which I've seen and studied, is that this is a phrase used to describe her family, that she is from a priestly and righteous family. She comes from the lineage of Aaron. She is part of the children of Israel. And there are many different verses in the Quran that talk about the idea of akh. So that when, for instance, certain prophets, when they go to their people, they're called akh or akha, that their brother actually came to the people. Was he literally their brother? No, not necessarily, but he's from that tribe, he's from that people, and he's from that community. We also see here what is set up is the idea that she comes from this priestly class. And this class is known to be righteous, is known to be a community of scholars, and she's judged more harshly if she came from this family, and rather she came from a different class. Also, we see that the idea of akh or ukht is connected in the Quran to things that are similar to it. So the word ukht is used in other places in the Quran, and we see that, for example, one verse says, وَمَا نُرِيهِمْ مِنْ آيَةٍ إِلَّا هِيَ أَكْبَرُ مِنْ أُخْتِهَا, that we didn't show them signs except that the previous one was greater than the one before. So there's this idea that ukht here is the idea of literally means a sister, but it's connected to the things before. So in this understanding, we see that Maryam is connected to that of Aaron, Moses, and to the children of Israel. Now, we also see here this idea that the verse continues and talks about مَا كَانَ أَبُوكِ إِمْرَأَ سَوْءٍ, that your father was not an indecent man, وَمَا كَانَتْ أُمُّكِ بَغِيًّا, and your mother was not someone who was unchaste. So what is remarkable or fascinating here is that the people are criticizing Maryam. They're slandering her, and they're doing it based on her family. Her dad was understood to be a good person. He was someone that was honorable or respectful. We already talked about Zechariah earlier, who was understood to be her uncle. And they also mentioned her mother. Her mother was seen to be a righteous, virtuous person. Her mother is mentioned in the Quran, and her birth story of how she gave birth to Maryam is noted in detail. And she was also understood to be someone who was righteous. And this sets up the idea of family expectations, that since you come from a particular family, you're supposed to act in a particular way. And once again, that can be both for you or against you. Someone coming from a family and say, oh, I know your dad. That may allow you to have networks. They may allow you to connect with different people. You may want to live out your family's legacy, but also it can be restrictive, right? It could also say that you want to be your own person, you want to be your own individual, but because you come from a certain family, then you're expected to act in a particular way that can often lead to rebellions, that kids want to not be like their mom or not be like their dad. And we also see here that there is this connection with the story of Moses. So when I first read the chapter of Maryam, I saw this verse, Ya ukhta Harun, O sister of Aaron. And as we discussed, it's an interesting phrase because it's connecting Maryam with Aaron, Harun. And one of the questions initially that I didn't think about but later came to mind is, why is the Quran trying to do this? What is the purpose of connecting Maryam to that of Aaron and that of Moses, of Musa? And we see that Maryam is mentioned in the Quran in different ways. So one of the arguments that I make in my forthcoming book is that Maryam is a protagonist. There's a complete story about her. She's mentioned as a daughter first, not just simply as a mother. Then she grows up and she's, as an individual, she is a member of the priestly class. She's a teacher. She teaches Zechariah. She eventually becomes a mother. And here she's mentioned as a sister. So you have different identities of Maryam. Maryam as a daughter, Maryam as a single woman, as a teacher, Maryam as a mother, and here Maryam as a sister. And there's been some really fascinating scholarship that argues that the Quran is making a connection between Maryam and that of Moses and the story of Moses and Musa. And this is interesting because oftentimes the story of Maryam falls within Christian-Muslim dialogue. We see Christian figures. There are articles and even books that talk about Christian figures in the Quran, and that Maryam is one of these Christian figures, along with Jesus. But the Quran, in fact, actually sees Maryam in connection with other prophets and other righteous figures. And you see elements of this within the story. So as we recall, if we go back a couple of verses, in verse 25, it says, وَحُزِّ إِلَيْكِ بِجِذِ النَّخْلَةِ تُسَاقِطْ عَلَيْكِ رُطُبًا جَنِيًّا. And shake the tree of this palm tree towards you, it will drop fresh, ripe dates upon you. There isn't an explicit connection here between Maryam and that of Moses, Musa, but there is a similarity that we see throughout the various traditions and prophetic stories, is that the prophetic or the righteous figures, they have to act in order to have divine grace and mercy fall upon them. So as we recall with Moses, Musa, he has to hit with his staff the Red Sea. And later in the Quran, he actually hits a rock and it gushes out water. So here, in a similar way, Maryam has to shake the tree. And the tree from it will come that of ripe dates. We also see other verses that explicitly connect the two mothers. So we have, for instance, in verse 26, that after she gives birth and she shakes the palm tree, the Quran says, وَكُلِي وَاشْرَبِي وَقَرِّنِي عَيْنًا. So eat, drink, and have the lightness of your eye. And as we discussed previously, this is connected to the mother of Moses, of Musa, where the Quran says, فَرَدَدْنَاهُ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ كَيْ تَقَرَّ عَيْنُهَا وَلَا تَحْزَنْ. It says, and we return Musa to his mother, so her eyes would be in a state of ease, that she would be happy, she wouldn't be sad. وَلَا تَحْزَنْ وَلِتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. And that she knows that the promise of God is true. but the majority of people do not know. So we have almost identical phrasing or words that are used to connect the two mothers, one mother of Isa, of Jesus, and the other the mother of Moses, Musa. So to conclude, we see in this particular verse, the idea of the sister emerges. The Maryam is mentioned in the Quran as Ibna, or as a daughter, the daughter of Imran, and the family that she particularly comes from. She's also mentioned as a mother, as as someone who gives birth to Jesus. She's also mentioned as a single woman who is teaching other people about spirituality. And here we see the explicit use of the phrase ukht as a sister, and someone who's connected to her tribe, her lineage, and comes from a good family. Also, we see here that in this slander against Maryam, people are already assuming, right? They could have asked her and they politely said, Maryam, what happened? And, what's going on? But they've already formed assumptions about her character based on this child. And part of the slander is the family she comes from. They immediately mention her father, that he was a decent man, and they mention her mother, who was not unchaste. So there are certain expectations that feed Maryam and that she has to live by. And it appears to the people that she's not living up to these expectations, and she's condemned. And I think for all of us, we come from particular families, and there's certain expectations that those families have, for the better or the worse. And finally, we see this connection with that, the story of Moses, Musa. And this was something unique for me, because as I started studying Maryam and studying the chapter of Maryam, Surat Maryam, I always understood this within the life of the Prophet Muhammad, that the Prophet Muhammad, especially in the late Meccan era, was feeling depressed, he was feeling sad, the community was weak, and this chapter in many ways alleviates or speaks to many of concerns that they had, and speaks to their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. But as I started researching and studying Maryam more, and this particular chapter, I saw this really unique connection between that of Maryam and that of Moses and Musa, that she is seen in some ways as a Moses type figure, in the sense that she is taking action, she is given miracles, there is divine grace, and that she's connected to the mother of Moses, of Musa, that just in the same way that God gave Moses and returned Moses back to his mother for the purpose that she would feel happiness and pleasure and not be sad. In the same way that Maryam is given pleasure. She's told to eat, drink, and that her heart will be at ease. Thanks once again for listening to the Islamic Mary podcast. You can pre-order my book, which is coming out on September 9th. I'm excited about that, organizing some speaking opportunities, lectures, going to visit some universities. I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast, which is available on all major podcasting platforms such as Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. You can encourage your friends, students, and colleagues to listen to this podcast. I know many of you are instructors and teachers and going to be teaching in the fall and spring. So I encourage you to use select episodes that you find beneficial. You can always text me or email me your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions. You can review this podcast. It always allows people to find it. And you can visit my website and join my newsletter, where I'll be updating folks on the publication of the book. I'll be doing some special giveaways of the book through the newsletter. So I encourage you to join that. Thanks once again, and take care.